Hello everyone and welcome back to JAS Reviews. My name is James and welcome to a very special YouTube video. Happy Halloween, or almost Halloween depending on when this video is posted, although I consider the whole of October to be the Halloween season essentially. If you didn't know from my special Halloween video last year where I talked about a lot of different songs that you could listen to during the Halloween season, Halloween is, in fact, my favorite holiday above all others. I just love the vibes of Halloween. Fall is my favorite season, and I think Halloween is just perfect for the fall season. I've really been looking forward to making this video because I love horror as a genre. It is one of my top favorites, and I am always endlessly intrigued by it, how this genre can lead to some of the best masterpieces ever made, but it can also lead to some of the worst disasters ever made in cinema. But when horror is good, it is really good and often vastly underappreciated. So what am I going to be doing with these horror movies today? Well, I am going to be ranking down my top 10 favorite horror movies of all time. Now, keep in mind that this is my list, and because of that, there may be some on here that you wouldn't personally put on here, or there may be some that you think are missing. Before I get into my top 10, I did want to list off a couple of honorable mentions, and I'll just talk about these very briefly. My first honorable mention would be Insidious. I've talked about this movie before, and if you saw my Malignant review on my last episode of The Critical Corner, then you know I talked about it there briefly, and I think it is the movie that honestly got me into the horror genre more than anything else, so a lot of appreciation for it. Other honorable mentions go to another James Wan movie in The Conjuring, which is just an excellent classic horror for the modern times, really just pays homage to all those classic Exorcist and demon possession movies and works very well. Another honorable mention would be Rosemary's Baby. I don't really like the director, obviously, because of what's revealed his personality has been like, but the movie's really good. Let the Right One In, which is a really powerful and surprisingly heartfelt vampire movie in the midst of all of its legitimate scares. New Nightmare, which I actually like better than the original Nightmare on Elm Street for all its ingenious meta-humor that Wes Craven does, which he would prove to do better in a movie that I'm going to be talking about shortly. And my other honorable mention would be Get Out, Jordan Peele's modern horror classic that I really wanted to put on my list, but it just didn't quite make the cut, even though I think it has some really biting racial satire, and I think the horror works really well in it. But, yeah, those are my honorable mentions, so without further ado, let's get into my number 10 pick. Now, some might think that my number 10 pick being The Shining, that might be a little bit of a too low spot for it. And I'll admit, I didn't see The Shining in earlier age like some people probably did, and I know some people probably have a lot more nostalgia for it than I do. I only saw it last year, I believe, and yeah, it is an excellent movie, of course. And of course it's going to make my list. I can see why it's a classic. Of course, there's a lot of things that work about The Shining. I could name off so many. Jack Nicholson's menacing performance as Jack Torrance, or Shelley Duvall's really great, heart-wrenching performance as his wife. I hate to hear about all the abuse that she apparently went through on set and how it changed her for the worst after the movie was over, but she really gave it her all. And the boy playing the son Danny is pretty good, even though he's not the highlight here, but at the heart of this movie is just a really foreboding plot about this person just going mad in this house, and the house holding all these really dark secrets, and it's very intriguing the way that Stanley Kubrick unravels all these secrets in his very surreal style that I think works very well for this movie setting. And I think it's just a really good interpretation, and there's so many iconic scenes in here that are going to be in movie history for pretty much as long as it can stay in people's consciousness, from the elevator that has a pool of blood coming out of it, to the twins that say come play with us, to the child riding his tricycle down the hall, to Jack Torrance chopping down that door and saying, "Here's Johnny," which is just an incredible scene from Jack Nicholson. It's incredible how many scenes in this movie are just in the cultural zeitgeist for seemingly a perpetual amount of time. So I think for all those reasons and the fact that this movie just works really well from a horror standpoint, there's a lot of tense moments, the great acting, and all the iconic scenes, this one more than deserves a spot on my list. At number 9 is another movie that I saw fairly recently, within the last 2 years, and that is John Carpenter's The Thing. And man, I mean, I'd heard about how this movie is and should be a heavily lauded classic, but it's not quite talked about in the same way that Halloween is necessarily. Even though I hear it talked about a lot, I don't hear it talked about as much as Halloween, and I don't really see why, because The Thing is excellent as well. It may not have the same iconic stuff that Halloween has, but The Thing is still very much so a great horror movie with a very cool setting and a really cool premise. I just love the idea that there's this creature that is able to turn into or inhabit other human bodies, and it can act like a normal human, and therefore everybody else, the crew, has to figure out who is the imposter, essentially. And of course, the creature designs and all the body horror in this and the natural makeup effects is just incredible. This movie was way ahead of its time in terms of what it was doing with effects and everything like that. It's really impressive. It holds up very well, which is why I'm always a huge proponent for practical effects over CGI when they can be used very effectively, and John Carpenter certainly knows his stuff in that regard. As usual, John Carpenter is able to compose a great score as well and create a great atmosphere, balancing very well between the tense, suspenseful moments and the moments that are balls to the wall insane in the best way possible. And of course, Kurt Russell's performance in this, just great, and really the cherry on top of everything, as he embodies a really cool charisma that this movie really needs. This is an excellent movie, and it's one that I'm sure I'm going to be revisiting more, and in fact, I'll probably be revisiting it this Halloween season just because of how well it works. At number 8 is what is considered by most, including myself, to be M. Night Shyamalan's best movie, The Sixth Sense. This movie is just on another level for him, even compared to his other great movies like Unbreakable and Split. I just think this one is leagues above. The main thing that this one actually has going for it is its real emotional core. I watched this movie recently, like I said, for this year, and it still blows me away just how emotional this movie is and how very poignantly it talks about death and reaching out and connecting with people, including family, and being vulnerable. This was back when Bruce Willis was actually trying in his acting as well, which is very helpful for this movie. It makes it work so much better. His performance is great here. It's very emotional, very powerful to watch. And when he realizes, of course, the twist of this movie, he really does a good job at delivering that revelation and making the twist have more than just a punch to it, but also a real emotional heft, once again, that Shyamalan nails. He doesn't just let the twist stand there, he does something with it. Of course, we can't go without talking about Haley Joel Osment here either, who I do think is the real highlight, and who I liked even more upon rewatching this movie this year. His performance is just excellent, one of the best child performances out there. He does a good job of being creepy when he needs to be, but he's not just a creepy child trope, which is so refreshing in a world of horror that still, to this day, can sometimes just make a creepy child, and nothing less. There's a lot more to this character, and there's a lot more layers that I don't think some people appreciate. The cast here is just amazing, and there's so many amazing moments in this movie, with the most memorable being, in my opinion, when Bruce Willis and Haley Joel Osment's characters attend this child's funeral, and they uncover something really dark there that works very well and is a really incredible moment. So yeah, this is a great film, and I think deserves to be in the conversation among the horror greats. I think number 7 is one that really needs no explanation. I mean, come on, it's The Exorcist. Most people have this one in their top 10 as well, and it's for good reason. Once again, I think this is just a great demon possession movie with a incredible performance by the main lead in this demon form. She really embodies the body horror of this character very well, and she just has the scares on lock. There's just a lot of great moments in this movie, and yeah, I just don't want to get into too much detail because it's one that's been talked about to death, and it's just an excellent horror movie. Not much else to say there. It's nearly pitch perfect. At number 6, we have Scream. Now, I mentioned in my honorable mentions that I was going to be talking about another Wes Craven movie that did satire better than New Nightmare, and Scream is that movie for me, in my opinion. I think Scream is a real game changer in the horror landscape, and I think it's a game changer for the better. Scream introduced satire into the horror landscape, and I think without a movie as iconic as this, satire would have never been introduced to the horror genre in the same way, and horror would have really suffered for it. The movie doesn't take itself incredibly seriously, but there are times when it is truly scary, and I think that goes to show that comedy and horror can go together at times when it's done well. Now, there are other times when comedy and horror can be very cringeworthy, but Wes Craven knows in this movie how to toe the line between the two, in my opinion. The iconic villain Ghostface is great, and I think it's interesting that this killer, more than the others, actually seems like someone who could be killed, but that makes it more intimidating that it's so hard to kill him, unlike others where there's a sort of explanation for why you can't. There's, of course, many great performances in this movie, especially Neve Campbell as Sidney, who is a really great main character that appears in multiple other Scream movies as well, and Courtney Cox is the real highlight here as the reporter Gale Weathers, who is a pretty complex character who I sometimes find myself very irritated with, but other times very compelled by. And that's a good thing. That means Courtney Cox did her job very well in delivering this performance. There's all sorts of great things to commend Scream for. It was a genre-defining movie, and I think it just works really well in balancing its tones, and Wes Craven just expertly directed it. Plus, the cold open of this movie with the phone call, the "What's your favorite scary movie" call, is one of the best opens of any horror movie I've ever seen. Just love it. An absolute classic. At number 5 is a movie that I just simply can't get enough of. I watch this movie every year during October at some point before Halloween, sometimes even on Halloween, and that is Trick or Treat. Now, when you talk about horror anthology films, I think Trick or Treat is the absolute best of this genre. And if you don't know what an anthology film is, that is when a film has multiple stories within the movie, and oftentimes there's a frame story surrounding it that sort of tries to tie them all together, but some movies do this better than others. I think Trick or Treat does the best at it. It actually creates a world here, a very interesting world that I just think is so ingenious, and it has so much fun with it. I love this idea that there's this town where Halloween is a sacred holiday, almost like Christmas is for Christians in our world. And it's so sacred to them that they follow all these rituals, and there's all these rules for Halloween, and if you disobey them, then there will be very dire consequences. I think this movie does a really good job at transitioning between the moments that are meant to be satirically funny in a Scream sort of fashion to the moments that are legitimately scary, such as the moment that revolves around these kids in this movie and them going and playing this trick, this cruel trick on this younger girl, and then them paying the consequences for it. And of course, there is the iconic main horror villain here, Sam, who is very unique as far as horror slashers go. I think he is one that should be in the conversation more just because of how ingenious he is and how fun he is. This is just such a smart movie, and I just think it's excellent in every way possible. I think it's pitch perfect, and yeah, I'm ranking it higher than movies like The Shining and The Thing and The Exorcist. Sue me, I just love it that much. Of course, while I said that I don't understand why The Thing isn't in the cultural conversation as much as Halloween is, I still do know why the Halloween is in the cultural conversation, and that's why this movie is within my top 5, in fact, at number 4. Halloween is a well-deserved certified classic, and in my opinion, is John Carpenter's best film that he's ever made. although there's still some other films by him that I have to see, but Halloween is just the perfect Halloween movie. I mean, it is within the very title, but yeah, it has the spirit of the holiday written all over it. And in my opinion, the best horror slasher in Michael Myers. And I think the main reason for that is that, at least in this movie, John Carpenter had a clear purpose for what Michael Myers was supposed to be. All he was supposed to be was a monster. Nothing more, nothing less. And that makes for some very interesting and pretty deep commentary in this movie that I feel like inspired other horror directors to start thinking deeper about their villains. As there's a lot of conversation in here, a lot of disturbing conversation about how does Michael seem so human in some ways, but yet there seems to be nothing human about him. And the fact that he can just constantly come back from the dead and seems unkillable. It's sort of foreboding to think. Of course, other highlights of this movie include Jamie Lee Curtis in her debut role, and her really delivering here in incredible ways, and Donald Pleasence as Dr. Loomis is just so much fun. And of course, you can't go without talking about the score of this movie. Halloween would not work as well as it does without John Carpenter's iconic Halloween theme song and all the iconic atmospheric music that goes on throughout the movie. It just works in every way possible and is one of the most memorable horror movie scores out there. And of course, that cold open. I mean, man, talk about a trendsetter, talk about something that's been replicated before, but never done as well as in the first Halloween movie. The horror works great in this movie, the build-up of scares is excellent, the way they reveal Michael is unsettling. Everything about this movie is perfect. Check it out if you haven't. At number 3, we have Ridley Scott's Alien. And yeah, I think this one is perfectly applicable to have in the conversation with other great horror movies. There seems to be some people, and I am glad to say that these people seem to be in the minority these days, who seem to think that just because a movie has science fiction elements in it, that it can't be a horror movie. I call BS on that. I think that's ridiculous, and I think sci-fi leads to horror concepts a lot. And I think Alien is particularly horrifying for a multitude of reasons. The most primary being that these characters are in space, and of course, as the incredible tagline goes, in space, no one can hear you scream. And that is a terrifying concept, when there's this creature hunting you, and you're trapped on this ship, and you're far away from home. There's nothing you can really do besides try your best to survive. And Ridley Scott does a great job with that concept here. I'm not sure if any other horror movie has made me tense up quite as much as this one has. And that might be mainly due to the design of the alien itself, which I think is probably the scariest creature I've seen in any film ever. Its design is just incredible. It still holds up very well today, still feels very unsettlingly real, and the way it hunts is just, oh, it is so eerie and so frightening and just not something that I would ever want to encounter, that's for sure. There's great performances in this movie as well. John Hurt is excellent in an earlier role of his, and Sigourney Weaver, of course, shines in this movie. Although I appreciate that this is more of an ensemble effort and that everyone gets their own chance to do something interesting in this, even if Sigourney Weaver does become the obvious standout. I don't think there's a single flaw with this movie. I think it's just excellent from front to back, and perhaps Ridley Scott's best movie that he's ever made. At number 2 is a movie that has been subject to controversy. It's one of those horror movies that sort of started the controversial horror movie type, and that is The Babadook. And these are, of course, movies that I would call more symbolic horror, and definitely more atmospheric horror as well. This movie, it doesn't ever really show its creature, and some people don't like that, and I can understand why. The Babadook is not a movie with excessive jump scares, and it takes a while before it really gets to ramping up the tension. But that's what I love so much about it. I love the slow burn feel of this movie, and I think it deserves all the praise that the critics gave it. And it seems that a lot of audiences have come around to it ever since. I just think Jennifer Kent, for her directorial debut, made something that is very special, and I've always really loved this movie's contemplations on grief. And the Babadook is, of course, sort of a representation of the grief process and of the idea that grief never really leaves you. When you lose a loved one or lose someone you care about, or just anything that involves loss, you don't really get over that quickly, if ever. Sometimes it's a constant process. Essie Davis as Amelia poignantly portrays this mother who is going through the grief process in an incredibly powerful and heart-wrenching way that I think is just very affecting for anyone. I just don't see how people could have a problem with her performance. I think it's really well done, and I think it feels very real. Noah Wiseman playing her son Samuel is also great, and it's interesting to see how grief affects him as well. It's very different, obviously, to Amelia, because he's younger, but the grief of losing his father affects him as well, and it affects their relationship. And on top of the commentary on grief is also a commentary on the struggles of a single parent raising a child, and how that can be its own form of horror in some way. And the Babadook itself, of course, even though we don't ever really see it, I still think its presence can be felt in this movie through the very creative usage of the children's book that is changing throughout the movie constantly, and through the scenes where we can see little glimpses of him, or when we hear his voice on the phone. I just think he is a creature that is terrifying, and the concept of him is terrifying in itself. The idea of this ever-imposing grief, and the fact that you will always have to tame it like a monster. I think it's just really powerful and really well done. I think this movie nails the symbolic horror well, and I don't think it ever does it in a way that is pretentious or obvious. This movie perfectly navigates that balance in a way that I don't think many other movies have been able to do like it. So yeah, this one's number 2 on my list. I have a special place in my heart for it, and I just can't deny how much I love it. And finally, at number 1, we have a classic among the classics, and what I consider to be my personal favorite horror movie, and I do think this is the best horror movie out there for me, and it's Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. This movie, from the first time I saw it, I remember when I saw it, I was at this high school retreat thing that I had been accepted to, and they had a movie night where they showed Psycho, and from the moment that iconic title score from Psycho came up, I knew I was in for something special. And yeah, this is a special movie. I think the black and white style of this movie only serves to help it more than anything else. It makes the scares more palpable, it makes the tension more real, it makes the lighting feel a lot more ingenious. The way Alfred Hitchcock uses black and white here is just incredible and makes for some great scares. And, of course, Norman Bates is an incredible villain, just one that is very scary, and how he can be so charming at one minute, but in the next minute he can turn into this deranged killer. There's just perfect moment after perfect moment here. The taxidermy scene, the beginning scenes, the shower scene, of course. I mean, what more can I say about this movie? This is one that has been talked about to death too, but I can't deny it. It's just a perfect movie from front to back in terms of how it delivers its horror and delivers its scares. Great performances all around, and yeah, there's just not much to complain about. The twist here works very well. Even when I knew what it was, I still really liked the way they delivered it. And the ending of this movie, I mean, man, talk about an impactful ending and a very foreboding one that just sends shivers up your spine. It's just incredible. Alfred Hitchcock, there's just not many people who can direct horror like him. He was just in a league all of his own, in my opinion, and this movie is definite proof of that. I think it's easily my favorite horror movie, and it's one that will continue to be in the conversation for best horror movies for years to come, and deservedly so. So yeah, that was my list of my top 10 favorite horror movies. And As always, I enjoy doing these videos every year around Halloween, so if you do enjoy these videos as well, then please be sure to give this video a like and to subscribe to my channel to see more content from me. Normally, I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece, and expect an update video coming from me very soon about me reformatting some things around on this channel. There are going to be some changes coming that I am sort of excited to talk about. But yeah, until then, have a good Halloween, and I will see you all in the next video.